Alright, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at Intel's 13th generation core processors. Now, this is the review kit that Intel sent us for the processors. However, your retail box would look much more similar to 12th generation core processors. I believe the i9 has special boxing and obviously much smaller, and it's not going to look like this on the inside, I don't think. So you basically have like a big printout of the core architecture. And here we have it bigger, obviously, than the actual silicon in here, but this is a die shot of the silicon encased in a display case. So you can put this on a mantle or something, or really for us reviewers, so we put in the background in our videos. We already have one for Threadripper, but that's actual CPU in it. This is kind of cool because it's a die shot, a little holographic. So yeah, that's there. So you probably see that in the back of some of our reviews. Here we have the Core i5, the 3600K, and here we have the Core i9, 3930K, or sorry, 13900K. Now the 13900K is the flagship. It replaces the Alder Lake 12th generation 2900K with this Raptor right here, Raptor 1. Now this would be the mama, and this would be the kid, I guess. And so this is the baby Raptor, the i5. Now the i5 is much more, it's a much more workable CPU. First of all, it comes at a decent price, around $300. I believe Intel lists the price for around $320, and obviously it's going to cost more because that's like trade price. This one's listed at $590 trade price, or what it should be. There's like $10 up and down on each one of these. So this one can turbo up to 5.8 gigahertz if it's under 70 degrees on like 1 or 2 cores. Well, I think 1 core. And then this can turbo up to 5.1. This has Turbo Boost 3.0 for that. Otherwise, it'll turbo up to 5.7 gigahertz if it's over 70. And like all cores should be around like 5.4, maybe 5.5, depending on the board on the i9. Here we have a single, well, 5.1, and then also like most cores can go 5.1 as well. So that's a turbo. Now on the E cores, since we have two, the performance cores is where that 5 numbers come from. Now the E cores in this one can go to 3.9 on the i5, and the E cores here can go to 4.3 gigahertz. Now these are also turbo frequencies. The E cores have turbo as well. Now the CPUs, now they have extra E cores. So while the 12900K had an 8+8 configuration for a total of 24 threads, 8 performance with hyperthreading, and then 8 just E cores, the 13900K, sorry about that, has 8 plus 16. So 8 performance cores with 16 threads plus 16 E cores, okay? Now, that's a higher core count, so this comes out to 32 threads. The previous generation came out to 24 threads. This comes to 20 threads total, and the 12600K Alder Lake CPU came out to, I believe, 16 16 threads, yeah. The turbos are much higher. The 12900K only went up to 5.2 gigahertz with Turbo Boost 3, but now you got 5.8 with Turbo Boost 3 plus thermal velocity boost. So that's pretty cute. Anyways, we have higher cache sizes. So starting here, we have 36 megabytes of smart cache, which is basically L3 cache with enhanced prefetchers, and the cache is smarter. Anyways, it's 36 megabytes here. On the 12900K, it was 30 megabytes. So you went from 30 and they added 6 megabytes L3 here. This one is coming in at 24 megabytes of level 3 cache, or what they call last level cache, LLC cache. So 24, and that improves upon 20 megabytes. So you get 4 more megabytes here, and you get 6 more megabytes here. Anyways, so let's go to the E cores real quick, or not the E cores, let's go to L2 cache. Now there have been big improvements to L2 cache too. So we saw the L3 cache has been increased, but the L2 cache has also been increased. So you basically get DRAM, then you get L3 cache, then you get L2 cache, then you get L1 cache, and then it goes and fed to the cores. So the cache is smarter and it's bigger. Now the cache sizes, okay, so L2 cache on this thing is 32 megabytes. Okay, they increased the sizes of L2 cache to basically 2 megabytes each for every P core, so that's 16 megabytes right there, and then increase the E core cache to 4 megabytes per cluster, so 16. So you get 16 plus 16 for a total of 32 here. The 12900K came with 14 megabytes of L2 cache for comparison. So you get 32 versus 14, and you gotta admit that's a pretty big bump in L2 cache. Now this one has the same thing going on. 6 performance cores with 2 megabytes each, comes out to 12 megabytes of L2 cache, and then the E cores in here, since you have 8 of them, that's 2 clusters, so you get 8 megabytes extra. So you basically get 20 megabytes total. Okay, so 12 plus 20 for the L2 cache. Now on its predecessor, it only had 9.5 megabytes L2 cache. Now let's talk TDPs. Now TDPs, all the hype today. These CPUs, as well as the previous CPUs, have very high operating temperature maximums. 95, I think, thermal junction temperature, which is called TJ, or TJ max, is basically, I believe, 100 degrees on these CPUs. This one will run hot. This will hit up to like 95. This one will not. This one has a lot more OC headroom than this one. This one has been tuned to its maximum. I don't know how they're going to come out with that 6 gigahertz skew unless there's like some really fine-tuned binning, which is possible. Intel has the technology. And then basically this one you can push up pretty easily, which is cool because you can get a lot of value out of that. Especially because it's really competitively priced against AMD's Ryzen 7th generation, like 7700X, 7600X. This one is very well priced, this i5 right here. And the i5 performs brilliantly too. It has those hungry cores that just want to give you power. I wouldn't call either CPU energy efficient. The TDPs come in at 181 watts here. That's max turbo, like P1 levels, but P1 is basically unlocked. So P1, which is like the limit of turbo power, 1 limit is it's basically you can sustain it longer and it's a lot more power. So yeah, 181 here, 253 here. They draw a lot more than that. Well, not a lot. It's not like double or anything, but it is a decent amount more. On the previous generations, the 12900K, the Alder Lake i9 was 241 watts, and now this one, Raptor, is 253 watts. So this one's predecessor, the 12600K, the Alder Lake, was 150 watts. And then this bad boy right here, the Raptor, the i5 Raptor, is 181 watts, I want to say. So that ain't too bad. But yeah, so the i5 and the i9 flagship, really good value right there. This one, I mean, I'll tell you what we already did. We gave this one editor's choice and this one best performance. I wouldn't call them energy efficient, but if there was a competition that was about who can draw the most power and give the most performance, Intel would definitely win. But the drawing power part is counterproductive sometimes to the performance, and I mean, if you pay your own electrical bill, you probably might see like a couple dollar difference. But otherwise, I mean, that performance there could also save you more money or make you more money if you're rendering stuff and you got deadlines and stuff like that. So that's important to some people. That's the whole reason a lot of people start overclocking, is to speed up rendering times and stuff like that. And so they overclocked, even though it drew more performance, they can make more videos faster, and so they more money. So this is definitely a high-end CPU. Now this requires really good cooling. Talking top of the line all-in-ones. Definitely 360 millimeter radiator. However, here's the thing: the dies in this thing right here, isn't so big. It's really tiny, right? Built on the Intel 7th nanometer process. Both these CPUs use 3rd generation SuperFin on Intel 7 basically platforms. So you're putting a lot of heat, right? We're talking like 250 some watts here, right? By default. And this one 180 watts by default. And they're going through a tiny area. That means that your cooling capacity is one thing because it's a lot of wattage, but also the area that can be cooled is also it's also a lot smaller where that heat's targeted. It's like a heat gun. Like if you wanted to melt down a motherboard or something and melt the solder on a specific inductor, if you get a heat gun with a little tip like that that can do that, I mean, that's basically how you got to cool the CPU, or what you're cooling at that point. So this is very concentrated heat. Now there are phase change coolers, thermoelectric coolers, which are also kind of phase change. Well, not really, it's thermoelectro effect, but the phase change coolers are basically like ACs. You have some novel designs like the Ice Giant, and you also have your Noctua like NHD15. You have all-in-ones that are 360 millimeters. You have custom water cooling. But honestly, since I've seen these CPUs, there's nothing more I'd like to do than toss this one under liquid nitrogen. And I still, I mean, I had my roots in liquid nitrogen overclocking. Well, I started with phase change and then dry ice and then liquid nitrogen over many generations. Started with Pentium 4 with the phase change. And I gotta say, if there's one processor I want to try under it, it's this. Today, this broke a world frequency record that hasn't been broken over a decade at 8.8 gigahertz or something. I think Asus was able to do that. Now, for liquid nitrogen, I believe 2/3 of these have cold bugs, so that can't be too great. So it's a luck of the draw. But I kind of really want to put this under liquid nitrogen. I still have the liquid nitrogen pot and everything, so maybe I'll see if I can rent a Doer. But anyways, we got these two CPUs and RAM. We should probably go over RAM speed. So both of these support DDR4 or DDR5. There are no motherboards that just support DDR4 or just support DDR5. There are only motherboards that support just DDR4 or just DDR5. So basically, these two go up to 5600 megahertz as rated by Intel, and the predecessors only went up to 4800 megahertz for DDR5. Both of these and the Alder Lake 12th generation CPUs go up to 3200 MTs or megahertz for DDR. So, or DDR4. Yeah, and also both of these and also the Alder Lake CPUs, they all have Ultra HD 770 graphics. So, I believe we're going to move on to basically testing and everything. These CPUs still have 16 lanes of PCI 5.0. The chipset's really what's been enhanced. The chipset now has a lot more PCI 4.0 lanes. It supports, I believe, up to 5 2x2 lanes of USB. And yeah, so that's the improvement you get with Z790. But yeah, same LGA socket. Now these are both cross-compatible, so if you have an Alder Lake CPU and a Raptor Lake CPU, both of them can work in Z690 or Z790 motherboards. But the Z690 probably need a BIOS update if they haven't been flashed recently. But the BIOSes exist for pretty much every board for support for both CPUs. So let's move on to performance. Alright, now we're going to take a look at the basically the 13900K and the 13600K, Raptor Lake, Raptor Cove, and Raptor Point, which is a Z790 chipset. So let's take a look at something first. Now we did mention the 13900K specifications and a 13600K, but there's also a 13700K, which is basically like the i9s, except with no hyper-threading and also less cache. So there's also a KF version of the i5, i7, and i9, and those all lack integrated graphics, and they come in a little cheaper. If you look at the prices all the way over here to the right, you will see that the KFs, they're about 20 bucks cheaper on average. So, or 25. I don't know. I personally, when I'm trying to overclock and stuff, I just disable them just to make sure that they're not adding any heat. But usually you could just leave them on. I mean, the encoders inside of them, the media engine, I believe Intel calls it, is actually quite good. Yeah, so anyways, so software improvements. We definitely need to talk about Thread Director too. Now I put a little square up there. Thread Director is a novel approach. Well, not really novel. It's basically, it's Intel telling the OS how to schedule its cores. Okay? So basically, Intel Thread Director, they updated the class boundaries. So basically, if you saw a demo in my original video review of this, Intel's Thread Director has like a Thread Director viewer where when they launch, they can make different threads, like background threads. They hit a button and it shows background threads and how they move among the cores, and then you add in like cores like gaming cores, like high integer functions, and they move around. And then there's also like AVX, AVNI, so AVX and then AVX2, AVX512, all that kind of stuff. And it shows how Thread Director basically allocates them, moves them around. Now, for Thread Director to work, three things have to be done. First of all, the most important thing is for the highest performing cores, which is the P cores, to be used first for single-threaded and multi-threaded performance. Like if there's nothing else going on, you want your P cores being used, right? Then the second thing they got to do is ensure that the, I'm going to quote one of Intel's videos right now, to spill over multi-threaded work to less performant cores. Performance is a fancy way of saying lower performing cores, or E cores. So less performant cores would be E cores, higher performant cores would be P cores. So you want to ensure the spillover of the multi-threaded workload onto the E cores, especially with multi-threaded performance. And the last thing you want to do is use SMT siblings, so basically the P cores hyper-threaded siblings, last to avoid any contention that could impact performance. So you want the basically hyper-threading to be used as a last priority. Now there's also something else I want to deal with, and we're talking about the Windows 11 22H2. The quality of service is basically how this OS handles services, right, and tasks. So they introduced like the background quality of service, the background QoS, that's actually already there. However, the utility QoS has been added. So this is also from Intel. So class boundary tuning was basically tuned for the added E cores within the OS in 22H2. It adds the new QoS, as mentioned, the utility QoS. So it's assigned background tasks. So basically, a background activity monitor will basically see what's in the background and assign it to E cores. And then, so it does this instead of tasks just being in Windows in the background. So they call this occluded Windows. So if you just toss something to the background, like some rendering or something, it could have just gone to the E cores, but instead now it actually can prioritize the task, and even if you send it somewhere, it should be working on that as it should. Now the OEMs, they have the ability to tune both the QoSs, and they can configure occluded Windows tasks on P and E cores. So the OEM and whoever develops this stuff can basically pick and choose which kind of cores they want to use. So I just thought that was important to go over. Thread Director is how the E and P cores survive in an ecosystem. Intel still needs to work on it a little bit. I will explain this coming in the benchmarks, that we did have to do our own little tweaks to get certain things working. I don't know what dynamic tuning technology is. Seems like it's mobile, and we're not covering mobile right now. So anyways, here's our first test setup. Now this is a Gigabyte not Oris. It's a Gigabyte Aero. So Z790 Aero G. Now here's the thing. So the CPU has PCIe 5.0 by 16 lanes, right? And it all goes to the first slot. But on this motherboard, it has an extra M.2 slot that is PCIe Gen 5, but it requires the first graphics card slot to go down to 8X. But then it also is like the only way you can get PCIe Gen 5 M.2s on this motherboard. This is not a gaming motherboard per se, it's more content creation and stuff. So they don't really highlight the VRMs, although the VRM under here is kind of a beast for what it is. They just kind of hide it, don't put it in their marketing. But pretty much all Z70 motherboards have beast VRMs, okay? Z790, sorry about that, have beast VRMs, like really high end. In this instance, you can see how the lanes are treated. Now, not all motherboards are like this, and they're using redrivers here, and they give you some options to tune those redrivers for PCIe 5, so there's not so much of a loss going to a single slot. But also, PCIe by 8 is a lot of bandwidth we're talking about. Our RTX 2080 Ti isn't really doing much. Now, the RAM is the same RAM we used in our Ryzen reviews. It is a DDR5 kit rated 6 gigahertz or 6,000 MTs per second. It's from G-Skill, and yeah. So basically, in our default test, what you're going to see, this kit is running at 4,800 megahertz, as it is both on AMD and Intel CPUs. We do not just go in and type in 5,600. As Intel recommends, it can go up to whatever. AMD has their own thing. We just use whatever's JEDEC default. So for DDR5, we're using 4800 on every system with DDR5. And this motherboard supports DDR5, but we also wanted to add in some non-XMP results with DDR4. So no XMP here, although we do have an XMP version of this, and that XMP version of this does use XMP on both DDR4 and DDR5 on the entire lineup used in our reviews. So here's the thing, another G-Skill kit, DDR4. Now this is XMP rated to 3600 megahertz, so in the XMP article you'll see it 3600 megahertz, but here's at JEDEC 2133. You know, like I tell them, if you want me to run it faster than that, have it go at that by default. I know for a fact you can have JDEC go up higher. Obviously, you're going to lose compatibility with really crappy DRAM kits, but I mean, you're selling like Z series boards, you're selling like AMD's X series boards. Maybe they should have a higher clock. But anyways, this is DDR4, and it is running on all systems at JDEC 2133, so don't get confused here. We will run this with XMP. Now, I will say something else. I have tested this already, some of these with XMP. Let's just say XMP doesn't make a huge difference. When it does, it basically takes it to the level of DDR5's non-XMP. And without it, it's really not a big issue in a lot of CPU tasks, and in some games they don't even care what the speed is on the RAM. So here we're testing a Z790 board. This is from MSI. It's a Tomahawk Z790 Tomahawk Wi-Fi DDR4. It's in its name. Boards are not compatible with each other in terms of RAM. So you can put Alder Lake and Raptor Lake in both Z790 and Z690, and you can go back and forth any combination you want between those four things. But you cannot put DDR5 in a DDR4 board, and you cannot put DDR4 in a DDR5 board. So you have to make your decision. DDR4 is really affordable right now. DDR5 is not super affordable right now. And Z790, I don't know, it just came out today, so I don't really know the actual retail prices. I haven't looked. But I have like 3 boards already, one from MSI, one from Gigabyte as you saw, and another one from SRock that was just came in earlier this week. So we'll have video reviews of all of those, I promise. So here we're going to look at Cinebench, R23, Cinebench, I don't know, I'm just going to call it whatever I want. It reminds me of Cinnabon, so Cinebench. Anyways, so we're going to take a look right here, and we're going to zoom in. That's why I use PowerPoint. So here we have top line, AMD one, obliterated. Here, obliterated still. Well, not obliterated. It's beaten by DDR4 counterpart of it. So these two are DDR4, and then DDR5, and then the same thing is up with the i5s. So we have DDR4, and we have DDR5, and DDR5, and DDR4. So basically, you can compare how they do against everything else. Every other CPU in here can only use either DDR5 or DDR4. It's only the Alder Lake and Raptor Lake CPUs that can alternate. So we did you guys a solid and basically worked night and day to get DDR4 in there. Otherwise, we would have probably just tested DDR5. So we can see that performance is really good. It's really, really, really good, and you'll see why when we go to power consumption. But I mean, as you've already heard, I mean, this is probably not the first review you've seen, but power consumption is pretty high. As we mentioned earlier, this thing has a very high workable turbo limit for PL1. I mean, they didn't give a crap about PL2 or 3 or whatever. But yeah, so that's the performance you get. This is the market leader at this point. Even on DDR4, it matches AMD's market leader, and in the affordable range, which I consider around $300, maybe $200 to $400, I think is affordable for most people who want to build like a performance gaming PC. This little thing is already showing some, well, not some, a lot of promise. I mean, look how it's doing against the 12900 on DDR5, and look how it's doing against the 12900 on DDR4. I mean, that's the last generation's top of the line. This thing has more cores and more threads, and it's still, you know, here. And while Alder Lake was good, and AMD's alternatives were good too, they're pretty much put aside in Cinebench. So all cores used, and then single cores used. We can see single core has gone up, especially over prior generations. Here you have the i5, and it's lower. It's much higher in the 2000s here. AMD does really well, actually, here. Here you have 2035 and stuff, and that'd be fine against these the i5. But boom, there you go. That turbo to 5.8 gigahertz at stock, 2200 points. So that one's pretty good. Anyways, so yeah, Intel really pulled out all the stops with this platform. Now W Prime, I told you I'd talk about something about how Thread Director messes up. It messes up with this. W Prime, basically, it comes and you have it at the forefront, and you can put it in real-time priority, right? But when you launch the benchmark, it generates background threads in the background, right? And W Prime is so old, no one's out there to change its quality of service where the quality, how the quality of service deals with it. So basically, it gets tossed into E cores, I think. So without actually going in and using a separate program to set the priority and override the scheduler to set everything for priority, the scores for Alder Lake and Raptor Lake are in like the hundreds of seconds, like really nuts. Like here you have 121. Nah, we're talking up to like almost way over 2 minutes. But then if you toss in everything onto real-time cores and you use all the threads, including all the E cores and the hyper-threaded cores on the P cores, you get some really good performance. Now, this one wins right here, the 7950X, because that's 16 hardcore heavy cores with 32 threads going up here against the 13900K, which is 8 hardcore cores with hyper-threading, plus the E cores, which are not so hardcore. They're basically equivalent to like Skylake, which is still very impressive. I mean, so yeah, but W prime is all cores, heavy load, but scheduler has to be overridden for this one to work. Okay, Blender. Blender is something AMD is traditionally really good at, but here they're really not that great at it. Basically, higher is better here, and this 13900K is trading blows with this 7950X. Even in DDR4, it's doing really well. This one still goes to 7950X, and these few benchmarks we've seen here are all cores. I mean, all cores, and it's really good. And the biggest boosts here I've seen are in these two tests. They've really pushed Intel up, right into the 5950X range. And the 7900, I mean, basically dominates the 7900. If we come down here, we see that the i5 is doing really well as well. So if you compare it to like comparable gaming CPUs from AMD, like the 7600 and the 7700, the i5s are very strong. And once again, we look at the 12900 performance, right? And we look at DDR4, DDR5, and then we move over. And if we put these graphs in order, we would see that the 1300K on DDR5 does really well compared to it. I mean, much better than on DDR4, but RAM is not really something Blender cares about so much. So let's take a look at something else. Okay, Handbrake legacy tests. Okay, yeah. Intel does really well here, and where Intel didn't do well, it just gets better and better here. So basically Intel dominates here. You're basically seeing some weaker cores plus some much stronger cores beating out a lot more stronger cores. And Handbrake Legacy, well, it's the legacy version of Handbrake. It's the older version, different encoding methods. So we're basically transcoding a 4K video to 1080p in the gray bars, and then basically taking a 720p video, just HD, and changing its format for mobile. So yeah, okay, now here we go. This is new Handbrake. So we're using 1080p fast and also a Discord. Discord is actually pretty intensive, the rendering for the Discord. 1080p fast is no slouch. So anyways, look at that 3900K. Boom, beats out that 7950X in Handbrake, in both. So that's pretty good. And even with DDR4, it still keeps up. I mean, it basically ties it in Discord. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. And it doesn't do as well with the fast 1080p, but I mean, still, it's very good with DDR4. Now let's go over to the 13600. The 13600, we see some very strong performance. Now, it's supposed to compete against the 7000 series here, so 7600. And the 77, right? I guess the 77 would technically be competing against the i7, and the 7700 or 7600 would be types the i5. I mean, that they're R5s or Ryzen 5s instead of i5s. Yeah, there's really no comparison. They're both using DDR5, and Intel wins. I mean, you're going to see this over and over again. And then if you compare generation over generation, there's a huge bump. Even DDR4 on a 1360 beats that out. And let's look here. DDR4 here beats out DDR4 on the 13 beats out DDR5 on the 29. So still DDR4 is a good option, and even DDR4 on Alder Lake is not that bad at all. So SuperPi, this is single threaded, single core. Yeah, I mean, single core performance is best when this is timed, so lower is better here. The blender you saw, everything else, that was all higher is better. Um, the blender was like frames per second rendered or something, so higher is better there. It's different than the older benchmark for Blender, which was like a time. That's a frames per second type thing. Um, Anyway, so lower is better in this benchmark. I think it's the only one in my stack that where lower is better, unless you consider power consumption, lower better. So anyways, uh, good stuff right here. Yeah, DDR4, DDR5, everything's good. Single core performance, even on DDR4, beats out everything from the Mama Raptor. Yeah, and the baby Raptor is doing well too. DDR4 is not always faster with these CPUs. DDR5 is pretty fast. Even with its higher latencies and number, the frequency offsets it. And you can see that here. Ada flops. Now, flops are floating point operations per second, and IOPS are integer operations per second. IOPS is really important. Flops, some things use it, floating point. Anyways, so you can see that AMD is doing much better in the flops, but in IOPS, always been Intel strong suit. They dominate here, dominate, and that cache must be helping them a lot because I mean, look at that, 300 versus everything else. I mean, it almost doubled the 2900K. I mean, it's ridiculous. And here you can see there's very little difference in DDR4, DDR5, but there is a big difference when it comes to overall performance. Uh, yeah, that's really impressive. And it's easily double IOPS performance of the 7900X, the 13900K. So yeah, this is like the benchmarks I use are rudimentary to other programs and how they work. They don't use that many crazy special instruction sets or anything like that. Just basic grinding, and this one's a really good teller of how things do. A lot of science stuff uses flops, AI stuff like that. Integer is also very important for like stuff like games. Anyways, memory, bandwidth. Now, people commented on somewhere else that the memory looked low, and I don't think they realized I was testing at 2133. I'm testing at 2133. This is plug and play, okay? This is not let me go set exactly what Intel or AMD wants. When they tell me to do something that's like different than if I just pulled it out of the box and I had to go modify it, that's a total different article. That's not a launch review where you go buy something from Micro Center, toss it in, and it should work. A lot of people don't even overclock their systems, let alone go tweak their RAM. RAM is like the easiest thing to get a blue screen from or a crash. I mean, so this is just stock, and like I mentioned before, there are JEDECs that are higher than 2133 that they can implement. But at least on their high-end enthusiast chipsets. Anyways, so you could see that DDR5 is way more bandwidth, but let me put it this way. I will do an XMP article. I'm not against running higher RAM speeds, so this is just basic default configurations. The only thing we do in the BIOS for this review is basically disable any types of virtualization, disable the integrated graphics, and then go in and make sure no multi-core enhancement or enhanced turbo is enabled, because those are motherboard features. The virtualization and GPU have nothing to do with it. The virtualization is more to get rid of core isolation, memory integrity. So I don't even have to play with the OS for that, or just have kill the hardware support, kill the feature, right? So it's not getting involved. Actually, Intel recommended we leave it on, but well, they left it on. I'll turn it on by default. I don't like sandboxing everything I use. Anyways, AMD memory. So here we have some okay results. These is latency, lower is better. Okay, you got me. This one lower is better, just like SuperPi. And we can see there's not much difference between the DDR4 and the DDR5, which is actually quite surprising. And I mean, it's pretty good. Not much to see here. Other than AMD is doing pretty good with this. With DDR5, AMD is doing really good on memory latency, especially compared. XMP might be a little different. Yeah, science mark. This one uses a bunch of floating point. So this is a more, how do I say this, legacy benchmark. It should only be really used for generation in generation. The overall score is in red. You see AMD does really well, and science mark will default on different memory and cache structures. It doesn't identify the lakes. Alder Lake, Raptor Lake, it can't identify their cache substructure, and you used to not be able to do that too with AMD Ryzen. Sometimes it gives me an error, sometimes doesn't, and it goes on a fallback. So you'll see there's wide differences in the memory performance, but overall, I mean, you can see that everything falls basically in line with its overall power. Molecular dynamics, cryptography, so it runs a bunch of tests, so we just pick these. Memory, cryptography, molecular dynamics, and overall. It is a science program, it's called ScienceMart. Yeah, so this is how the performance is. Make what you want of it. It's legacy benchmark. It doesn't support over like certain number of cores, so I don't think it supports over 32 threads, but it does support 32 threads for sure. Can't use it on Threadripper or anything. Too many cores and threads. CloudGate. Okay, now we're getting to 3D gaming. So, CloudGate. Yeah, these we're going to have to zoom in. So, CloudGate, we're doing pretty well here. Even in these high core count ones, we're doing well. See, overall scores in red, and Physics X, I believe, is in gray. Oh no, Physics X is in blue. So blue would be the CPU, the GPU would be gray, and the overall score would be in red. And Intel's doing pretty well. It's a beastly CPU up here. Moving back down here, we can see that the 7600 and the 7700 are AMD's top of the line, and they're very good. I mean, beating everything else out, right? Even the 36, they were beating everything else out, and now this one comes in and just kicks it out. But the 77 is pretty strong at 77, and then it's matched basically by the 13600 on DDR5. So yeah, Intel really took back its core performance. So yeah, this was beating out everything until this one came along. You can see a slight drop with DDR4, and then DDR5 on the 2900K is roughly the same as the 77. Then the i9 comes into the 80s and kind of knocks it out. So yeah, that's your first taste of gaming. So now let's go for the second taste. Sorry about that. This is 720. Oh, I thought I was supposed to be. Yeah, now we go to Firestrike. So on Firestrike, we can see that Physics X is blue still and score is red. Physics is very strong on the 3900K, and it should be. I mean, it should be. But overall score isn't too crazy different. DDR4 slight bump down on the hybrid CPUs. DDR4 takes a slight little hit. So overall performance is good. Physics X performance, which is like the physics, there used to be a separate card for it. Now it's part of the CPU. Does most of that work. And then overall performance is okay, but it's not exactly kicking the 7700 or the 7600 out of the park. Those two CPUs are still very strong in this arena, but then you get the 13900K at a pretty reasonable price coming in and, you know, cleaning up. So, Unigen, an engine used in a lot of games. Now, here we can see that it's actually a really good teller of how games do, because a lot of games use this engine. And, yeah. Now you get a score in FPS. It doesn't matter which one you look at, because there's actually like there's an algorithm or equation to how these are related, the score and the FPS. So basically, yeah, if you want to see if someone's faking, do the calculation, it'll give you what the FPS should be. So anyways, so DDR5 is right here. I think maybe that's private too. Maybe like HWBot keeps it behind in the back, or you can maybe dig it up on the internet, but it's to basically catch cheaters. They give you both of them. So anyways, here's a score on the 13900, and it's, yeah, impressively good. Now this one's a little better, the 7700X, 7600X, and it still dominates this, and well, not dominates, but it does really well. Intel's one hope is this, and yeah. But let's put it this way. This is 720p. Let's increase the resolution. Okay, now that we increase the resolution, we can see something different. 9800, okay? These are blown out of the park, the top two. We go here, this one loses out too, the 7700X, the 7600X too. So as we increase the resolution, Intel does better. Look, the 1360X even does better than the 77 and the 76. Um, so, yeah. So that's a pretty interesting result, change from 720 to 1080. Let's take a look at Resident Evil. I think you can see it, but I'll zoom in anyways a little bit. Yeah, ballpark. Just hits it out of the ballpark. Here we have the 36 at 53. Here we have 56. Yeah, AMD gets a little dominated here by a long shot. Yeah, I wanted to say just in 1080p or 720p, but no, they get it pretty much handed to them. At least in DDR5. DDR4 is a little bit different. If you want a stopgap, sure, get some DDR4 and a less expensive Z series board or something like that. And you should be okay. So, let's keep going. Rise of the Tomb Raider. Okay. I also have a Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Maybe I'll use that next gen. Or next round. I'll use Shadow of the Tomb Raider. It's a newer game, I believe. I have like 20 games. I only use a few of them. The games I use here, some might seem old, but they don't use... They're just matured. And they're good. They show us a realistic trend that will apply to other games. Our graphics is at 2080 Ti too, so it's sometimes better. But the other titles are AAA titles, and they're like Tom Clancy stuff and Far Cry, stuff like that. I also have like Civilization 5. I guess I could add those. Anyways, so Rise of the Tomb Raider, yeah, boom, boom. There is a big difference here in DDR4. Now, you also see this in Ashes next. DDR4 takes a big hit here, but here's the thing. If I enable XMP, okay, these DDR4 scores shoot up to DDR5 levels. So we gain about 20 frames per second with XMP on Raptor or on the hybrid CPUs, at least in the i9s. So they basically go up. So a lot of people can, like, this is where they all were asking questions. Why is DDR4 so much worse? Well, if you increase the memory speed, it's not that much worse compared to DDR5 at a decent speed. So yeah. Anyways, apart from DDR4, DDR5, take a look at the little AMD 7000 series against the Intel. So you have the 7700, the venerable 7700, and the even more venerable 7600 gaming CPUs, and they're doing very well, and even better than the Raptor here, or equal to. But then you have the Raptors here, so it's like when the baby Raptor can't do it, the mama Raptor comes. So, oh, these Raptor jokes, I mean, they're cool. I mean, I don't know why everyone thought about, like, Jurassic Park. Why didn't they, like, reference the F-22? It has a lot more in common with the F-22. I mean, it's a piece of tech. It's extremely costly. Not so much in price like the F-22, but this is costly in power, which I guess is also price. And, yeah, it's like cutting edge. It's the best. But, I mean, some things make it prohibitive, like cost. And in this case, it's power, and we'll see that soon. Anyways, escalation. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, look at this. This DDR4 thing is what I'm talking about. 20% across, both in DDR4 and DDR5, both here and here. However, we did go test again, and we get 20% bump up, or more than 20% bump up. These basically go into the 20s. The difference is pretty high. These go into the 20s. These go into about the 30s. With XMP. So XMP does help with DDR4. It doesn't do much with DDR5. I will say that. I've already tested DDR5 XMP, and let me just tell you that the XMP doesn't help all that much in gaming for DDR5, but in DDR4, I guess the speed difference and latencies are so different that the extra speed does help, and the latencies are only slightly worse. So, but yeah, this is Ashes, and the CPUs are doing pretty good. And what we saw in Alder Lake, where it blew away everything, we see again in Raptor, where it just dominates everything. It's basically like shutting down the game. It's like don't even bother coming at me, AMD, because it's gonna be tough. But we're going to see why that is in a second, and how you can't really run like that all the time. But anyways, here we have GTA 5. Pretty much we're hitting the limit of our graphics card here, but it's okay down here. You can see some variance. Pretty good. Not much difference because it's basically hitting the limits. So, anyways, GTA 5, playable on everything. Maybe a little bit worse, like a couple FPS worse here on the 1097, which is at this point 4 generations ago or 3 generations ago, however you want to count it. But overall performance is really good across the board. DDR4, DDR5, not too much difference in this game. Or other games, it's just the Ashes and the Tomb Raider game that had to prefer DDR5. They like memory. Anyway, power consumption. This is what we're talking about. This is what people were talking about all day today. Because I mean, this is YouTube. We got to talk about what's fun to talk about, and this is pretty fun to talk about. So the 13900K pulled 383 watts. I didn't even overclock the RAM. And that actually adds stuff on DDR5. Not so much on DDR4, but on DDR5, it can add like 10 to 20 watts. Anyways, not even that 16 true-core 7950X pulls 383 watts. Some of them were receiving over 400 watts. Depends on your configuration. But in this case, 335 watts is a lot of watts. But 383 is like 50 more watts. And the performance wasn't worth 50 more watts. Now here's the thing about transistors used at high speeds. The voltage frequency curve does not scale linearly. It is literally an exponential curve. So the higher you hit your frequency like boundaries, which in this case this thing is probably aiming for 5.8 at default, and most users are going to aim for 6, but they're probably not going to hit it. Or they might hit it with one core. Basically, well, I'm talking like air cooling or water cooling. It's going to be pretty hard to hit 6, but you can do one core. We almost tuned it out. We ran out a little bit of time before the review, but here you see a lot of performance. But if you want that cutting edge performance, you gotta pay for it in cost of power. Power isn't free. It costs some money. Even if you come from a nuclear generator like a nuclear power plant, like my power does here. Lake Ann is I don't know, 3 hours away from here in Virginia, and I'm in Virginia, and my power comes from nuclear, but I still gotta pay for it. You know, pay for the upkeep and stuff, and you got regenerative stuff too, like solar panels and turbines and stuff, but you still got to pay for it. It still has upfront cost, and then you have to replace it, and then you got to get batteries and stuff like that. So everything has a cost, and power does cost money. And although it might not be crazy these days, and we're switching over from burning coal and stuff like that for power in some areas, we still got to pay. And not only is this hot, but it'll heat up a room. I mean, Threadripper was hotter than this, but Threadripper was meant to be hotter than this. The thing goes up to like 64 cores. This thing has 8 cores, performance cores, and the efficient cores too. But here's the thing. Well, 16 efficient cores, I believe. But the thing is here that we have to understand is Intel traditionally went for efficiency, especially with Sky Lake. The focus there was efficiency, right? Now, they wanted the best performance per watt. And the Gracemont cores basically do that. The Gracemont cores offer you performance per watt. So I guess some people at Intel were like, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to offer performance per watt at a really good performance per watt rate. But we're also going to go and toss in our highest end cores and show everyone what we can do. And it's going to draw a lot of power, yeah, but only when they're used through Thread Director. So here, where we see an AVX load, put on all cores, you're seeing 383 watts compared to 16 cores on the 7950X. You put AVX on any Intel CPU, it'll do this, but like not this much, not this much. I mean, look at the 12900K. But this one is much higher frequency than 12900K. It's 12900K what? Like went to like what, 5.1, 5.2 on Turbo Boost 3.0. I think 5.1. This thing goes to 5.8 if you can keep it under 70 degrees Celsius. And if not, it'll still go up to 5.7 under normal turbo mode. So yeah, thermal velocity pushes it to 5.9. But if you push all cores past like 5.5, you're going to throttle. it's going to happen. You're going to have a bad day. So basically, you want to tune in an overclock that's a little bit different, and let's talk about that now. Zoom out. Here, okay, so I just want to show this to you. This is where we wanted to see if we could actually get 6 gigahertz on all core on air, and as you can see, we can and we did. But as you can see by the core temperatures, we definitely didn't load that thing. So you see all the P cores here. There's 1.6 volts. V-core vids are here. These are requested vids. It doesn't mean this is actually given to the CPU. But yeah, it kept requesting around 1.5, and this is for 6 gigahertz, and we haven't even put a load on it. Like, we didn't even want to see what this will go if we put a load on it. Plus, at the first instant we put a load, throttle, crash. So 6 gigahertz all core is not really possible here. We did set around this voltage, 1.34. This still gets really, really hot, even at like 5.5 gigahertz. But I mean, hey, that's a lot more than the 12900K could ever do. So, we're okay with it. RAM, really easy to get up there. Obviously, this is going in like gear 2. In the half because DDR5. On-core frequency does actually boost up. Under turbo, this will hit 5 gigahertz, I believe, if I remember correctly. So, anyways. This is the new XTU. We have it set to a white. I'm not the biggest fan of the black backgrounds. I actually find this easier on my eyes. Everyone's different. A lot of people like the dark modes and stuff like that. I just like this is easier. Maybe it's because I'm used to staring at a word processing page like in Microsoft Word, or the background in Excel. They're all white for me, so white is a lot easier to see than any type of darker grayscale tone. Anyways, you have the option to change it now. That might be one of the most exciting things about this. But we did try the auto overclocking. I think it only adds 100 megahertz. We do like the addition here of actually being able to visualize what the cores do. XTU is a good program though if you want to see like what your cores are set at. Here, this is boosting up on this motherboard at 55x on each cores. I don't know, man. I tried some motherboards and XTU told me they were all set to 58x, and that was by default, and I was like, no. What is it called on your motherboard? And then I went and checked it and I disabled it because, I mean, you can't turbo all your cores up to 58x on this CPU and not throttle. So XTU is good at indicating that. You can make real-time voltage changes, you can make real-time everything changes basically in XTU. Everything you really do in the BIOS you can do here. This is a lot easier program to work with than Ryzen Master. XTU is not that it's been around longer, it's that they really improved it over the years, number one. Number two, it's intuitive. I mean, you hit something, you hit apply, it does it. It doesn't restart 50 times like Master might. For even like voltage change sometimes. It doesn't have different modes on the side. You have to pick something. You can't change your current mode like you'd want to, stuff like that. You just go to advanced tuning here, change it, and it changes it. In Master, you have to like go in, oh, do I go in my creator mode? Do I go into curve optimizer? Do I do this? Do I do that? And it's a little bit more difficult to work with. This is not. This is simple, straightforward. This is like a normal overclocking program, and maybe I like it, the white background, because it looks more like the light utilities that motherboard vendors used to put out. Like Gigabyte has something called GTL, Asus had like AI Light, something like that. I don't think they really do it anymore because XTU has basically made that market null, but maybe for their liquid nitrogen people they do. Really lightweight utilities that can change the processors. Anyways, you have XTU here. Anyways, so while the 13900K doesn't overclock crazy by manually tuning it, and when you do manually tune it, you have to use these active core things. It's the only way you can get that high single core clock or 2 core single core clocks up there, and then have your like all 8 cores go differently. Then you have to use like offsets, and then maybe even LLC to alter and manipulate the voltage a little bit to be okay with all cores at 55x the lowest voltage, and then as high as it can be at 58x and just 1 core without killing the processor, but then also being able to switch that voltage correctly and quick enough. Yeah, so you got to watch the ramp up times and stuff, and there's ways to do it. Some motherboards though, a little bit too many options in their BIOSes can cause a little bit of angst and confusion. I'm pretty sure that's to come soon once a lot of motherboards get out there and people get more familiar with them and attempt to overclock. So I have motherboard reviews, I'll explain those as they come. So the 13600K has a lot of potential to overclock. The scores here at Cinebench are higher than they were in the other one. Here we're basically hitting single core clocks, basically the same frequency as the 13900K, 57X. And you see that CPU single core basically like a 13900K. All core overclock, not as high, but you can also go over to HW monitor and see that there was some throttling. There might have been a little bit here or somewhere there. But yeah, it almost hit 100 degrees. 95 to 100 is usually where these CPUs throttle a little bit, but if they throttle back, they push back up until they throttle again. It's kind of like you keep hitting something until it goes, the nail gets in there, you keep hitting it with the hammer. That's kind of how throttling works. Push it in, can't push anymore, pull back, push again. So, yeah. We're definitely not at 0.756 volts, unless I guess we're idle, and we are. This was like 1.3 something volts set, and then, yeah, 1.32 maybe less maybe. Yeah. So basically, that's all good. SPD Expo. This is an AMD kit, but in the BIOS in boards that we have, it has an XMP option too. So anyways, we're going to give the best performance award to the 3900K. It is perhaps the best performing CPU we have on our hands right now. And it's a brilliantly devised CPU. You get your efficiency out of the efficiency cores. You get your performance out of the performance cores. It is like going to both extremes to a maximum and then enhancing the middle area a little bit and working on getting the operating system to take advantage of that mixed hardware. So best performance, it's a lot of efficiency, well, it's a lot of energy used. So if Intel is going for the most energetic CPU, they definitely got it. And that dinged it a little bit in the power consumption numbers. But, I mean, what else do you expect from the high-frequency CPUs? So best performance, and then editor's choice gets best... what is that symbol? Oh, I guess it's saying it's over. But editor's choice for the 13600K, because it is a killer gaming CPU, has overclocking potential, isn't too crazy on power, and it comes in at a really good price. And the price on the 13900K is actually very reasonable considering it's an i9. So Intel hit it out of the park this time in pretty much every way possible. So any questions or comments, leave them below. Oh, we have a written version of this too. So thank you for watching and have a great day.